Things I wish I knew before I became a teacher.
How do I effectively manage a classroom without being too strict or too lenient?
As a teacher, you are balancing a fine line between being too strict and being too lenient, between being too hard on your students and being a pushover. The best way I heard it described is it's a dance. And it's interesting because a lot of the teacher prep programs will tell you, and the books you read will tell you, don't smile at your students till Christmas, to be super strict at the beginning and then you can let up. That was never my style. And I found that backing up a little bit, if you're too strict with your students, they start to kind of resent you. They might respect you, but it's unlikely that they're going to go super far above and beyond to do well in your class. On the other side, if you're too easy and if you're a pushover, they're not going to step up and they're not going to raise their game. So you've got to find yourself right in the middle. Can't remember who said it, but I was at a training, I think it was an Avid training, and the presenter talked about being a warm demander, meaning you're warm in the sense that you care, you want what's best for the student, but you have high demands. And so what I found is, because I'm not a yeller, I would see a lot of other classrooms where teachers were yellers, and it just seemed really stressful for the teacher and the students. Didn't want to be in that situation. So what I found was, for me, what is my strength? My strength was, one, I love building relationships with students, big part of the game, and two, technology. So instead of me threatening and yelling all the time, I would use technology to my advantage. Technology helped me make seating charts. Technology helped me document when students were out of line. Instead of me yelling out, big, oh, you did this, that, the other, whatever. I just had a simple system for documentation to write down what happened and when. And then when 2 or 3 offenses came together, I was able to show the students that, hey, this is kind of what's happening. There's a pattern here. Do we need to take this to the dean or the principal or your coach or whatever? And often when they started to see those list of offenses, they would kind of back down. I was also able to set up a system where I had to call parents for misbehavior or tardies or whatever it was, also positive behaviors you should do. And I was able to automate a system where I was able to call parents without me having to make the call each time. And that saved tons of time. And what ended up happening is, at my school of about 60 plus teachers, I had the most parent communication out of all teachers, but I spent the least time on it. And that gave me a lot of freedom to work more on what I wanted to actually work on.
What are some strategies to engage students who seem uninterested or unmotivated?
You're always going to get a group of students that are uninterested or unmotivated, no matter what subject you teach, even if students pick your class. And so one thing I didn't do well my first year, I just went by the book, we went through the lessons. Tried to make it as engaging as I could, but inevitably you're going to lose students. Every student is motivated a little differently. Some are motivated purely by scores and letter grades. Others are motivated by they're interested in the topic. Others are motivated by this is fun for me, or prizes, or candy, or snacks, or whatever it is. And so you have to recognize that in a classroom of 15, 30, 40 students, you're going to have different motivations in your room. And so you've got to provide those different opportunities. Sometimes it's going to be they win a prize, or they win a snack, or they win a homework pass. Others, it's going to be about a grade. But build in those games and those competitions. It's fun to have competition in the room. Not everything is a competition, but there are a lot of things that you can make a friendly competition, and that gets a couple of students to engage in ways that they probably wouldn't without. Also, there's tons of online games now available that can kind of gamify what you're doing. And I would found if I would have a set of 4 or 5 questions and I just asked the students in a regular manner, they wouldn't be into it. But if I turned it into a game, specifically a Kahoot, they would get extremely competitive and they loved it.
How do I balance covering curriculum with making lessons interesting and relevant?
Making lessons interesting and relevant is everything. And of course, your administrator, your principal, your district is going to tell you got to cover all the curriculum, and sure, that's great. But if you cover all the curriculum and it's boring, not a win. So spend more effort working on making your curriculum fun, engaging, and relevant. And this isn't coming from your boss, it's coming from me, but I'm saying I would rather cover 80% of the curriculum or 70% of the curriculum extremely well and extremely relevant than 100% of the curriculum in a boring way. So the reality is you're not going to get to 100% of everything most of the time anyways. If I'm going to err on not getting to it and making it awesome in the process.
What should I do when a student consistently disrupts the class?
Once again, I'm not a yeller. That was not fun for me. So you got to build a relationship with that kid. You've got to find something to chuckle and laugh about. You got to connect them on their way into class, find out what they're interested in, having these conversations with them. If their only conversations with you are about how they messed up, how much trouble they're in, how they're not doing any of their work, they're going to avoid you and they don't want to talk to you and they resent you. So find something outside of school, not necessarily meeting them outside of school, but that they're interested in outside of school and talking to them about that. Maybe they're a barber, maybe they're into skateboarding, basketball, they like shopping, they like movies, they like anime. All kids are into something. So find what it is that they are interested in, engage with them on that. If you can add something about their interest into your lesson and then kind of, connect with them on that, they will love you for it because their other teachers aren't doing that. And they might not get an A in your class, but at least they see you're making that effort. You start to build that connection and you'll be amazed at the progress that makes with students. Now, if their offenses are increasing, once again, I'm all about documenting the offenses. I'm not a yeller, but now after those 2 offenses, and I had a Google form that I would fill out with what went wrong. And then when a student messes up, instead of yelling at them, I'd pull them up to my desk and I'd say, hey, here's the form I'm filling out. And they would see it and they'd be like, whoa, they don't know who that form goes to. They didn't realize it was just me. They didn't know it didn't go to the principal. I'd say, hey, do we need to fill this form out? And then once, 2 or 3 offenses would hit, I would escalate that to whoever the person over disciplined in our school is. And now they recognize that there's a problem. Often documentation was the biggest barrier to discipline happening in the schools I worked in.
How can I build positive relationships with students while maintaining boundaries?
Great question. I saw both ends of the spectrum when I was in teaching. There were some teachers that were extremely professional, like to a fault, to where they wouldn't laugh or they wouldn't shake a kid's hand. And on the other hand, there were teachers that were completely unprofessional and they were didn't have appropriate boundaries with students. So where do you draw the line? It kind of depends. There's not a hard answer here, but I would say I worked really hard to say I'm going to give contact with every student on the way into my classroom, handshake, high five, fist bump, something on the way. I loved secret handshakes, every student having their own. That's a huge win. Asking students what they're interested in, being engaged, and finding ways to communicate appropriately. So we used Canvas and Google Classroom, Edmodo, and I worked really hard to use those messaging systems to be in constant contact with students. If you are a coach, often it's helpful and necessary to have your students' phone numbers and to be texting them and have these text groups. That's cool. As a teacher, a public school teacher, often it's not appropriate to have your students' phone numbers, but there are exceptions to that, and I can't go over what all of those are. But I would say at the end of the day, you're a teacher, but you're also a positive mentor and a coach in a student's life, and you need to look at everything as what's going to be best for the student in this situation. And you're kind of in a unique spot there because your principal and the district leadership, they can only make decisions over what's best for the entire institution, but often as a teacher, you get to look at, okay, what's best for this student in this scenario. So keep what's best for the student in mind, not what's best for you.
What are some effective ways to assess student learning beyond traditional tests?
Assessments. I think that's a great question in 2025. Your schools obviously are big on standardized testing, standardized assessments, multiple choice tests, standardized tests, and then your 5-paragraph essay. With AI coming out a few years ago, that's getting less and less relevant. But how do you actually assess students knowing that they can just go home and use ChatGPT? I think the best is with project-based learning, they're actually creating something. Students were built to create. They have fun creating and they own it with creating. Now, you can't create a whole project with AI. So whether it's creating a business, building something, doing a podcast, making a video, them sharing with you face to face about what's happening, you have to find ways for them to have ownership into what they're creating. But in my example, when students created their own business and then they had to pitch that business in class, they were able to use AI to help them, but at the end of the day, they had to get up in front of the class and they had to present. And so having something tangible that they actually create or present, in my opinion, is the best way, because you can be great at multiple choice tests, but if you can't present, you can't talk to people, you can't connect, you're not going to be successful in those jobs.
How do I communicate effectively with parents, especially about difficult topics?
Here's a key with communicating with parents. One, you need to find out a way to automate it from day one. I know that sounds less personal, but I had 240 students. If I tried to call 240 parents, if I called one a day, I wouldn't have time to call them the whole school year. So finding a way early and often. You don't want the first communication with parents to be negative. So find ways to have positive communication before school starts, sending out messages. Hey, I'm Mr. Johnson. I'll be your child's teacher this year. I'm super excited. To, hey, today was the first day. It went really well. Now by the time day 3, day 5, week 2, when something negative does happen, they've had all these positive interactions with you already. So you're not only coming to them with negative. But when you do have to come to something with negative, stick with truth and facts, not feelings. So instead of, oh, I felt so disrespected by my student because of this, focus on the student did this, and this is what happened, and this is the consequence. If you want to talk about it more, you can set up a parent conference by calling the office. That way, the parent is not coming into your classroom to discuss. You have a third party, which is a guidance counselor, assistant principal there to have a conversation if things get heated. But you're always providing them with that option. This is what happened. Here's the consequence. If you want to talk more about it, some parents do, some don't. If they do, here's the channels to do that. You go through guidance and you set up a parent conference.
How do I stay organized and manage my time with lesson planning, grading, and other responsibilities?
Almost impossible. As a teacher, you've got 25 hours of work to do in a day, only 24 to do it, plus you got to sleep, eat, go home, and take care of your family. So you are going to have to pick and choose. I would tell teachers when I was mentoring them, if you can get 60% of what you need to get done, you're doing really well. That said, you've got to figure out what moves the needle, right? I used to spend a ton of time on grading, and then I realized a lot of my students, like if they're not going to a 4-year university, like as long as they're graduating, a lot of them didn't really care that much about their grades. Now, it's not the case for every school and everybody. That was often the case for me. That said, you got to figure out what moves the needle. If I have an hour outside of school, my school day to work on something, do I want to spend that whole hour grading, that whole hour planning creative content for my students, that whole hour calling parents? Which one are you going to do? You need to figure out what's going to help your students the most. If for your students, having very specific feedback on their grades is what helps them, do that. But for me, often it was spending that hour finding creative ways to engage them the next day was most valuable. And I automated my parent communication. I tried to automate my grading as much as possible. You got to figure out what works for you. But at the end of the day, if you're working 24 hours a day and you're not sleeping at night, you're not taking care of your family, you're going to burn out and you're only going to be a teacher for a year. So you got to find ways to stay in the game by taking care of yourself and not overworking.
What do I do if I feel overwhelmed or burned out during the school?
Welcome to teaching. That's almost every teacher every year. But the reality is, are you in this for 1 or 2 years, or are you in this for the long game? I taught for 11 and a half years. There were years where I felt completely burned out and frustrated, others where I felt invigorated. But I'll tell you what worked really well for me was setting strict boundaries with my work. I know it's hard to do because you get into teaching because your heart is huge and you care so much. But again, if you're just a big flame and you flicker out after a year, what good is that? So find ways to stay in it by, one, taking care of yourself. For me, a big one is going to the gym every day and leaving my work at work. So I would work about 30 to 60 minutes outside of school, but often that was in the morning before school. When I left, I tried to leave for the day. Also knowing your stage of life. When I was single and I didn't have a family, I was able to go to tons of school events after school and in the evening, and it was great. When I got married and had a child, I wasn't able to do that so much anymore. But I didn't beat myself up over it. I was taking care of those that were closest to me, and that was a good thing, and that was a good example to my students as well. So know that there are seasons where you're going to be able to give more and give less, but at the end of the day, you need to take care of yourself in such a way that how are you helping take care of yourself for the coming school year? Another great way for me with that was going to conferences. I would try to get the school to pay for them and getting connected to networks of teachers, because often in your school, there's a decent amount of negativity, and there's not always going to be teachers there that teach what you teach that are fired up about it. But if you can get connected to networks, conferences, and you're being motivated and fired up by what people are doing across the country and across the world, that will set you up to be excited about the coming school year. So hope this was helpful. Feel free to join our For Education community. I'm excited to serve you and answer any questions you have about teaching.